Continuing where I left off, Chapter 7. Prince Vasily kept the promise he had made to Princess Drobetskaya, who had appealed to him on behalf of her only son at Anna Pavlovna's soiree. The matter was laid before the Emperor, an exception made, and Boris was transferred to the Semyavsky Guards with the rank of ensign. But all Anna Mikhailovna's efforts and stratagems failed to obtain for him the appointment as adjutant or member of Kusavo's staff. Not long after Anna Pavlovna's soiree, Anna Mikhailovna returned to Moscow and went straight to the home of her rich relations, the Rostovs, with whom she stayed in Moscow, and where her beloved Borenka, who had only just entered a regiment of the line when he was transferred to the Guards as an ensign, had been brought up, having lived there since childhood. The Guards had already left Petersburg on the 10th of August, but her son had remained in Moscow to get his equipment and was to join them on the march to Radzivilov. The Rostovs were celebrating the name day of the mother and younger daughter, both of whom were called Natalia. Since morning, a ceaseless stream of horse carriages had been coming and going, bringing to the Countess Rostov's big house on Povarskaya Street, a house known to all Moscow, friends wishing to congratulate the two Natalias. The Countess and her handsome elder daughter were sitting in the drawing-room with the visitors, who kept coming one after another. The Countess was a woman of about 45, with a thin, oriental type of face, who looked worn out from childbearing. She had given birth to 12. Her leisurely speech and movement, which was due to weakness, gave her an air of distinction that inspired respect. As a member of the household, Princess Anna Mikhailovna Drobetskaya was helping to receive and entertain the visitors. The young people, not feeling obliged to be present, were in the back rooms. The Count met the guests, saw them to the door, and invited them all to dinner. "Very, very grateful to you, ma chérie, or manger," he said to every one without exception, and without the least variation in his tone, whether they were above or beneath him in rank. "I thank you both for myself and for our dear ones, whose name day we are celebrating. Now, mind you come back to dinner. I shall be offended if you don't, manger. I cordially invite you on behalf of the whole family, manger." These words were repeated each time with the same expression on his plump, jolly, clean-shaven face, with the same firm pressure of the hand, and several abrupt little bows. As soon as he had seen one visitor to the door, he returned to the drawing-room and, with the air of a man who loves life and knows how to live, drew up a chair, jauntily spread his legs, put his hands on his knees, and gravely, swaying to and fro, made conjectures about the weather or volunteered advice on matters of health, sometimes in Russian and sometimes in very bad, self-confident French. Then once again, like a man who is weary but steadfast in the performance of his duty, he escorted the visitors to the door, and, stroking the sparse gray hairs over his bald spot, again invited them to dinner. Sometimes on his way back from the hall, he would go through the conservatory and the butler's pantry into the large marble dining room, where tables were being laid for 80 people, and, looking at the footmen bringing in the china and silver, moving tables, and unfolding damask cloths, he would summon Dmitri Vasilievich, a nobleman who looked after all his affairs. "Now then, Matenka, see to it that everything is as it should be." "That's right," he would say, looking with satisfaction at an enormous table that was being extended to its full length. "The chief thing is the service. That's it." And with a complacent sigh, he would return to the drawing-room. Marya Lavlona Karagina and her daughter, announced the Countess's gigantic footman in a deep bass from the doorway. The Countess reflected a moment before taking a pinch of snuff from a gold snuff box with a portrait of her husband on it. These visitors have exhausted me, she said. This is the last one I shall see. She's so terribly affected. Ask her to come in, she said to the footman in a dejected tone, as if to say, well, put me to the rack. A tall, stout, haughty-looking woman and her round-faced, smiling daughter entered the room with a rustling of skirts. Chère Countess, it's been so long. She has been confined to her bed, poor child, at the Rumskets ball, and the Countess Apraskina. I was simply delighted. Vivacious feminine voices were heard interrupting one another and mingling with the rustling of dresses and the scraping of chairs, and there began one of those conversations that go on in the same way until, at the first pause, the visitors rise, swishing their skirts and saying, "It's been so delightful. Mamma's health," and the Countess Apraskina, and again rustling their skirts, they passed into the hall, put on their fur coats or mantles, and leave. The conversation was on the chief topic of the day, the illness of the rich old Count Bezukov, reputed to have been one of the handsomest men of the Empress Catherine's time, and his illegitimate son Pierre, who had behaved so indecorously at Anna Pavlovna's soiree. "I am exceedingly sorry for the poor Count," said one of the visitors. "He was already in poor health, and now this mortification over his son, it will kill him." "And what might that be?" asked the Countess, as if ignorant of what her guest was alluding to, though she had heard about the cause of the Count Besukov's mortification at least 15 times that day. "This is what comes of modern education," her friend continued. "Even while he was abroad, that young man was left to his own devices, and now I hear that he did such atrocious things in Petersburg that he was sent away under police escort." "You don't say so," remarked the Countess. "He made a bad choice of friend," interposed Princess Anna Mikhailovna, Prince Vasili's son. "He and a certain Dolokhov, they say, have been up to heaven knows what, but they've both been made to smart for it. Dolokhov has been reduced to the ranks, and Besukov's son has been sent to Moscow. In the case of Anatol Korygin, his father somehow got it hushed up, but even he was sent away from Petersburg." "They're regular ruffians, especially Dolokhov," said the visitor. "He's the son of Marya Ivanovna Dolokhova, such a worthy woman, and just see what happens. Can you imagine? Those three got hold of a bear somewhere, put it in a carriage, and sets it off with it to visit some actresses. When the police rushed in to restrain them, they tied one of the police back to the bear and threw them into the Mokia Canal, and the bear swam off with the policeman on his back." "A fine figure that policeman must have cut, Major," roared the Count, almost splitting his sides with laughter. "Oh, how dreadful! What is there to laugh at, Count?" But the ladies themselves could not help laughing. "It was all they could do to rescue the poor man," the visitors resumed. "That son of Kirill Valimirovich Besukov chooses a nice way to assume himself," she added, "and he is said to be so well educated and clever. That's what comes of an education abroad. I hope no one here will receive him, even if he is so wealthy. They wanted to introduce him to me, but I absolutely refused. I have my daughters to think of." "What makes you say this young man is so wealthy? The Count's children are all illegitimate," said the Countess, turning away from the young girls, who instantly pretended not to be listening. Pierre, too, I believe, is illegitimate. He has a score of them, I suppose, said the visitor with a wave of her hand. Princess Anna Mikhailovna broke into the conversation, evidently wanting to show her connections and her knowledge of what went on in society. As a matter of fact, she began in a meaningful half-whisper, Count Kirill Valimirich's reputation is well known. He's even lost count of his children, but this Pierre was his favorite. How handsome the old man still was only a year ago, observed the Countess. A handsomer man I have never seen. He's very much changed now, said Anna Mikhailovna. But, as I was saying, she continued, through his wife, Prince Vasily is in direct line to inherit the entire estate. However, the Count is very fond of Pierre, took great pains with his education, even wrote the Emperor about him, so no one knows, in case he should die. And he's so ill they'll expect it any minute and have sent for Dr. Lorraine from Petersburg, who will get that immense fortune, Pierre or Prince Vasily. 40,000 serfs and millions. I know this quite well because Prince Vasily himself told me. Besides, Kirill Vladimirovich is my mother's second cousin, and he's Borya's godfather, she added, as if attaching no importance whatsoever to this fact. Prince Vasily arrived in Moscow yesterday, remarked the visitor. He comes to make an inspection of some sort, I am told. Yes, but entre nos, said the princess. That is just a pretext. Actually, he came to see Count Kirill Valimirich after hearing how bad he was. Say what you will, ma chère. That was an excellent joke, said the Count, and seeing that the elder visitor was not listening to him, he turned to the young ladies. I can just imagine what a fine figure that policeman cut. And waving his arms about to show how the policeman must have looked, his portly body again rocked with the deep, resounding laughter of a man who always eats well, and even more certainly drinks well. Now do, please, come and dine with us, he said. Chapter 8. A silence fell. The Countess looked at her guest and smiled affably, without, however, concealing the fact that she would not be in the least distressed if they were to get up and take their leave. The visitor's daughter was already smoothing down her dress and looking at her mother inquiringly, when suddenly from the next room were heard the footsteps of boys and girls running to the door, the crash of a chair knocked over, and then a girl of 13, hiding something in the folds of her short muslin skirt, darted in and stopped short in the middle of the room. It was obvious that her precipitous flight had carried her further into the room than she had intended. At the same moment there appeared in the door a student with the crimson collar of an officer of the guards, a girl of 15, and a plump, rosy little boy in a short jacket. The Count jumped up, held out his arms, and with his swaying gait went forward to take the little girl in his embrace. Ah! Here she is, he exclaimed, laughing, the little name-day girl, my little darling. Ma chère, there is a time for everything, said the Countess with a feigned severity. You're always spoiling her, Ilya, she added to her husband. Bonjour, ma chère, je vous félicite, said the visitor. Quelle délicieuse enfant, she added to the mother. The little girl, not pretty but full of life, with her black eyes and wide mouth, her childish shoulders from which the bodice had slipped in her rapid flight, black curls tossed back, slender bare arms, little legs encased in lace pantaloons, and feet in low slippers, was at the charming age when the girl is no longer a child and the child is not yet a young woman. Escaping from her father's embrace, she ran to her mother, and, not paying the least attention to her severe remark, hid her flushed face in her mother's lace collar, and broke into laughter. In fragmentary sentences, still laughing, she tried to explain something about a doll which she produced from the folds of her skirt. "Do you see? My doll, Mimi. You see," she... But Natasha could say no more. Everything seemed funny to her. She sank onto her mother's lap and went off into such peals of laughter that even the decorous visitor could not help joining in. "Now run along and take that little monstrosity with you," said the mother, pushing her daughter away with a feigned severity. "This is my younger daughter," she said, turning to the visitor. Natasha raised her head from her mother's lace collar, looked up at her through tears of laughter, and again hid her face. The visitor, compelled to admire this domestic scene, saw fit to take part in it. "Tell me, my dear," she said to Natasha, "what relation is this Mimi to you? Your daughter, I presume." Natasha, not liking the lady's condescending tone toward her childish concerns, did not reply, but stared solemnly at her. Meanwhile, the other members of the younger generation, Anna, Mikhailovna's son, Boris, an officer, and Count Elder's son, Nikolai, a student, his 15-year-old niece, Sonia, and his younger son, Petrusha, had all taken seats in the drawing-room and were obviously trying to keep within the bounds of decorum and the vivacity and merriment that radiated from every feature of their faces. In the back rooms from which they had dashed so impetuously, the conversation had evidently been more amusing than here, where they had to listen to town gossip, talk of the weather, and the Countess Asperskina. Now and then they exchanged glances, hardly able to restrain their laughter. The two young men, the student and the officer, had been friends from childhood, and though of the same age, had both handsome, were not at all alike. Boris was tall and fair, with delicate, regular features, and a look of the composure on his handsome face. Nikolai was a short, curly-headed young man with an open expression. Dark hair had already begun to appear on his upper lip, and his whole face expressed impetuosity and enthusiasm. Nikolai blushed when he entered the drawing-room. Apparently had tried without success to find something to say. Boris, on the contrary, was instantly at ease. He very coolly and humorously related how he had known this Mimi, the doll, since she was a young girl, before her nose had been broken, how she had aged during the 5 years he had known her, and now had a badly cracked skull. As he had said this, he glanced at Natasha. She turned away from him and looked at her younger brother, who had screwed up his eyes and was shaking with silent laughter. Unable to control herself any longer, she jumped up and ran from the room as fast as the nimble legs would carry her. Boris maintained his composure. "You wanted to go out, I believe, didn't you, maman?" he asked, turning to his mother with a smile. "Would you like the carriage?" "Yes, go." "And tell them to get it ready," she said, returning his smile. Boris quietly left the room and went in search of Natasha. The plump little boy ran after them crossly, as if vexed that his pursuits had been interrupted. Chapter 9. The only young people left in the drawing-room, besides the young lady visitor and the Countess' elder daughter, who was 4 years older than her sister and behaved quiet like a grown-up, were Nikolai and Sonia the niece. Sonia was a slender, diminutive brunette with melting eyes, shadowed by long lashes, a thick black braid wound twice around her head, and a tawny hue to her complexion, especially on her neck and her bare, thin but graceful muscular arms. Her fluidity of movement, the softness and flexibility of her small limbs, and a certain coyness and reticeness of manner made one think of a pretty half-grown kitten that gave promise of becoming a beautiful little cat. She evidently thought it proper to show an interest in the general conversation by smiling, but in spite of herself, her eyes under their long, thick lashes kept watching her cousin, who was soon to leave for the army, with such passionate, girlish adoration that her smile did not for an instant deceive anyone, and it was obvious that the kitten had settled down only to spring up again more nimbly than ever and start frolicking with her cousin as soon as they too, like Natasha and Boris, could escape from the drawing-room. "Yes, Magia," said the Count, addressing his visitor and pointing to Nikolai. "Now that his friend Boris had been made an officer, he doesn't want to stay behind. So for friendship's sake he is leaving the university and me and his old father. He's going into military service, Magia, and he had a place waiting for him in the archives department and all. Now, that's friendship for you, isn't it?" "But they say war has been declared," said the visitor. "They've been saying that for a long time," replied the Count, "and they'll say it again and again, and things will remain just as they are." "Mon cher, that's friendship for you," he repeated. "He's joining the hussars." The visitor, not knowing what to say, shook her head. "It's not out of friendship at all," said Nikolai, flaring up and defending himself as if from some shameful imputation. "It's not out of friendship at all. It's simply that I feel the army is my vocation." He glanced at his cousins and the young lady visitor. They were both gazing at him with smiles of approval. "Schubert, a colonel in the Pavlograd Hussars, is dining with us today. He has been here on leave and is taking Nikolai back with him." "What can I do?" said the Count, shrugging his shoulders and making light of a matter that evidently distressed him greatly. "I have already told you, Papa, that if you're not willing to let me go, I'll stay. But I know I'm not suited to anything but the army. I am no diplomat, no government clerk. I can't hide what I feel," he said, continuing to glance at Sonia and the young visitor with the flirtatiousness of a handsome youth. The kitten, feasting her eyes on him, looked as if she were on the verge of resuming her gambols and displaying her thoroughly kittenish nature. All right, said the old Count. "He always flares up so. This Bonaparte has turned all their heads. They all think of how he rose from a lieutenant to become emperor. And why not?" he added, not noticing his guest's derisive smile. The elders commenced talking about Bonaparte. Julie, Madame Karagina's daughter, turned to young Rostov. "What a pity you weren't at the Arkovs on Thursday. I miss you," she said, smiling tenderly at him. Flattered, the young man moved nearer to her and engaged the smiling Julie in a private conversation, quite unaware that his involuntary flirtatious smile had pierced Sonia's jealousy heart like a knife as she sat blushing and smiling unnaturally. In the midst of the conversation, he glanced at her. She gave him a passionately angry look. Barely able to restrain her tears and maintain the forced smile on her lips, she got up and left the room. All Nikolai's animation faded. He waited for the first pause in the conversation, and with a distraught expression got up and went to look for Sonia. "How all these young people wear their hearts on their sleeves," said Anna Mikhailovna, indicating Nikolai as he went out of the room. "Cousinhood is a dangerous neighborhood," she added in French. "Yes," said the Countess, when the ray of sunshine brought into the room by these young people had vanished, and as if answering a question no one had asked her, but which was always in her mind. "How much suffering, how much anxiety has been gone through that we might rejoice them now, and yet, even now, that anxiety is greater than the joy. One is always afraid, especially at this age, so full of dangers for both girls and boys." "It all depends on the upbringing," observed the visitor. "Yes, you are right," continued the Countess. "So far, thank God, I have always been my children's friend and have enjoyed their complete confidence," she said, repeating the fallacy of so many parents who assume that their children have no secrets from them. "I know that I shall always be my daughter's foremost confidante, and that if Nikolai, with his impetuous nature, does get into mischief, and a boy is sure to, It won't be like those young men in Petersburg. Yes, they're splendid, splendid youngsters, declared the Count, who settled all perplexing questions by deciding that everything was splendid. Well, it can't be helped. He's taken it into his head to be a hussar. So what can I do, Mangea? What a charming creature your younger daughter is, said the visitor. A little spitfire. Yes, a regular little spitfire, said the Count. Takes after me, and what a voice. Though she is my daughter, I am speaking the truth when I say she'll be a singer, a second Salamaroni. We've engaged an Italian to give her lessons. Isn't it too early? They say it harms the voice to begin training it at that age. Too early? Not at all, said the Count. Why didn't our mothers used to marry at 12 or 13? And she's already in love with Boris. What do you think of that? Said the Countess, glancing at Boris's mother with a gentle smile and pursuing a thought that was evidently always on her mind. Now you see, if I were to be severe with her and forbid it, goodness knows what they might be up to in secret. She meant they might be kissing. But as it is, I know every word she utters. She'll come running to me in the evening and tell me everything of her own accord. Perhaps I spoiled her, but I really think it's better that way. I was stricter with my elder daughter. Yes, I was brought up quite differently, said the handsome Countess Vera with a smile. But the smile did not enhance Vera's beauty, as smiles generally do. On the contrary, it gave her an unnatural and therefore unpleasant expression. Vera was pretty, well brought up, a good student, and not at all stupid. She had a pleasant voice, and what she had just said was both apt and true, yet strange to say. Everyone, the visitors and the Countess alike, looked at her as if wondering why she had said it, and they all felt awkward. People always try too hard with their first children. They want to make something exceptional of them, said the visitor. We don't deny it, Mangea. Our little Countess tried too hard with Vera, said the Count. But what of it? She's turned out splendidly, he added, with a wink of approval at Vera. The guests got up and took their leave, promising to come back to dinner. What manners! I thought they would never go, said the Countess after seeing them out. Chapter 10. When Natasha ran out of the room, she went only as far as the conservatory. There she stopped and stood listening to the conversation in the drawing room, waiting for Boris to come out. She soon grew impatient, stamped her foot, and waved on the verge of tears because he had not come at once when she heard the young man's discreet footsteps approaching at a moderate pace. She darted in among the tubs of flowering plants and hid there. Boris hesitated in the middle of the room, looked about, brushed a speck of dust from the sleeve of his uniform, then went up to a mirror and examined his handsome face. Natasha, very still, peered out from her hiding place, waiting to see what he would do. He stood a little while before the glass, smiled at his reflection, and went toward the opposite door. Natasha was about to call him, but changed her mind. Let him look for me, she thought. Hardly had Boris gone when Sonia, flushed and in tears, came in through the other door, muttering angrily under her breath. Natasha controlled her impulse to rush out to her and remained in her hiding place, observing, as from under Fortunatus's cap, what went on in the world. She was experiencing a novel and a peculiar pleasure. Sonia kept glancing back at the drawing room and muttering to herself. The door opened, and Nikolai came in. Sonia! What's the matter with you? How could you? He exclaimed, rushing up to her. It's nothing. Leave me alone, she sobbed. Oh, I know what it is. Well, if you know so much the better, you can go back to her. Sonia, listen to me. How can you torture me and yourself because of a mere fantasy? Asked Nikolai, taking her hand. Sonia did not withdraw her hand and stopped crying. Natasha, not stirring, scarcely breathing, watched with sparkling eyes. What will happen now? She wondered. Sonia, I don't care about anything else in the whole world. You're everything to me, said Nikolai. I'll prove it to you. I don't like it when you talk like that. Well, then I won't. Only forgive me, Sonia. He drew her to him and kissed her. Oh, how lovely, thought Natasha. And when Nikolai and Sonia had left the conservatory, she followed them and called Boris to her. Boris, come here, she said with a sly, meaningful look. I have something to tell you. Here, here, and she led him into the conservatory, to the place where she had been hiding among the flower tubs. What is this something? He asked. She became flustered, looked about, and catching sight of her doll, which she had left lying on one of the tubs, picked it up. Kiss the doll, she said. Boris gazed at her eager face with an intent, affectionate look, but made no reply. Don't you want to? Then come here, she said, going farther in among the plants and dropping her door. Closer, closer, she whispered. She caught the young officer by his cuffs, and a look of fear and exultation came over her flushed face. Would you like to kiss me? She asked in a barely audible whisper, peering up at him from under her brows, smiling and almost weeping with excitement. Boris blushed. How funny you are, he exclaimed, bending down to her and blushing still more, but waiting and doing nothing. All at once she jumped up onto one of the tubs to be taller than he, and embracing him so that her slender bare arms clasped him above the neck, she tossed back her hair and kissed him full on the lips. Then she slipped down among the flower plants on the other side of the tub and stood waiting with lowered head. Natasha, you know I love you, but... Are you in love with me? Natasha broke in. Yes, I am, but... Please, we mustn't do that. What? You just... In another 4 years. Then I will ask for your hand. Natasha pondered. 13, 14, 15, 16, she said, counting on her slender little fingers. All right, then it's settled. A smile of joy and reassurance lit up her eager face. Settled, replied Boris. Forever? Asked the little girl. To death itself? And with a look of happiness on her face, she took his arm and they walked slowly into the sitting room. And I'm going to leave it off there. Thank you for continuing to watch this series. I hope you're subscribing or looking at it. You don't have to do anything. You can continue looking. You can give it a thumbs up, a thumbs down, leave a comment below, view, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.